Hey everyone, welcome to the episode. This is TAOTalks, the art of exploring life, thought, and meaning. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode today. We started this episode by talking about what fights look like for us, both Jesse and I. Fights in a sense really of conflict resolution. Then we talk about trigger points and what those are. And finally, we talk about the truth, specifically in the conflict resolution setting. What is the truth and that we're trying to get into? So I think we will really enjoy this episode. Enjoy. This is TAOTalks. T-A-O. The art of Tao. TAOTalks, the art of exploring life. TAOTalks, the art of being. TAOTalks, philosophical musing. TAOTalks, ancient wisdom for modern beings. TAOTalks, the art of understanding. TAOTalks, universal laws. TAOTalks, timeless insights. Welcome to TAOTalks. T-A-O, the art of. Hi, Jesse.
Hey, Spit.
What was when we were observing feelings, what was the last feeling that you observed? Maybe in the meditation or now, earlier?
There's a few. I think at the deepest level, I feel like just a little bit of sadness. Kind of a few levels going on. There's a little bit of just distraction. It's New Year's Day. Brain's kind of active. Just coming from basketball practice. There's a football game on. Just kind of watching, walking in. So like there's a little bit of that just superficial distraction. Judgment. Oh, that was there. That's the other one. Judgment.
Feeling of judgment?
Yeah. Partly because of the getting into the meditation, I was struggling. Like I was in that more superficial state. And so there's the judgment of catching myself.
Like not being able to...
Not dropping.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
So that was there during meditation, and I had to take some deep breaths up. And I was actually partway through the meditation, was going, well, this is a little bit longer meditation. I might need a little bit more time.
I think, that question kind of just came to me in the meditation. And I was like, I'm curious, like what feeling you experienced that you recall last.
Yeah. It took a second for the judgment to catch up because I was like, there's definitely something there.
Question. What are your fights look like?
My fights?
Yeah.
My fights with who?
With you can have the freedom on selecting who we're talking about, but friends, family, partner, what does it look like? And I'm really actually curious about like your feelings, but as well as like what you think others observe in you when you're in the fight. I guess we could start with, do you get into fights?
I don't get into fights very much. Not in the, take that back. I think we have to define, like, what do we call a fight? Like, how do we define fight? There's definitely a way in which I would define fight in which I would say I'm always fighting. There's always the struggle.
Well, there's that, and then on the other spectrum is you're physically like fighting someone, and I am not talking about that either.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's I think we're getting more into the fight in the sense of conflict. Just general conflict doesn't necessarily have to be fisticuffs. Doesn't even have to mean screaming and yelling. It can just mean how do you deal with conflict. In which case conflict's constant. It's all the time. I deal with conflict by trying to get to the center of what is true. And understanding that what is true is really there's three different perspectives to what is true if you're in conflict with someone else. And it could be conflict within yourself. So this could be a conflict within yourself or conflict with someone else. But I think you're speaking more in general with conflict with another.
Yeah.
So there's three versions of the truth when you're in conflict with someone else. There's your truth, there's their truth, and then there is the truth. And my truth and their truth are versions of the truth, but they're also got a lot that's not true because they're going to be skewed based on our faulty perceptions. So for me, getting to the heart of conflict is getting to the heart of those three truths and at first, no truth is more important than the other truths. So there's my truth, which I need to be able to articulate. And there's whoever I'm in conflict with, their truth, which I want to be a soundboard for them to be able to articulate.
Listener, yeah.
And, it's, hopefully depending on how well, I communicate with that other person. I mean, a lot of it depends on the other person. So if we were talking about my partner, she is very open to conflict, how we approach conflict resolution.
What does that mean? Yeah, she's very open to how you approach conflict resolution.
So, I'm a very provocative person. Like, the being oriented towards what is true tends to be very provocative. Because part of figuring out what is true is shaving off as much of the things that are not true. The aspects of what I'm perceiving that aren't necessarily the truth, and the aspects of what the other person is perceiving that aren't necessarily the truth. And what we're perceiving could be baggage. Could be that the conflict came up because I said something that was triggering. Mm-hmm. And if it's triggering to something that's in the past. So it's got less to do with what we're talking about now, but something gets triggered in the past. And now all of a sudden we're dealing with that. But I don't know that we're dealing with that. And the other person doesn't even necessarily know that we're dealing with this other thing that's now there. So getting to the heart of that is provoking, because it's going to, to question what is true about that story is very, you're trying to slice into the truth. It's provocative to do it to begin with, partly because the truth is not always comfortable. The truth can be very harsh at times. So my partner is very open to that process, to being provoked, knowing that I play fair, I play in good faith. So when I
her knowing that,
her knowing that means that she is willing to feel uncomfortable, be provoked, and even respond from a provoked place.
Yeah.
Because she knows that I won't take it personally. And it just allows us to kind of dive into it. And sometimes it gets, it can get uncomfortable, it can feel heated. Especially when one side is provoked.
Even when they would know best intentions and all the things that you're talking about.
Well, yeah, because what gets provoked is
shadow self.
So what is a trigger? I think we talked about that a little bit in a previous episode, and I used the analogy of the knee-jerk reaction. Somebody hits your knee with a rubber hammer, and your knee automatically moves. So there's the trigger, and then there is a neurological response that follows the trigger. So when something gets triggered emotionally, there is an emotional response and it can literally be like, it will take us back into time. Whatever got triggered is probably something from a past history, something could be a lot of past history. And so if that history gets provoked, then the feelings associated with that history will come up as if we were living in that time right now, as if it was being relived. And the cascade of emotions that existed in that trigger will come up. And it comes up in a way in which the person doesn't necessarily know, well, that was then and this is now, and we're not in that place.
Yeah.
And so they could get provoked to where they're seeing me as somebody attacking them, as if I was in that previous time. And they don't even necessarily know that they're in that trigger. So that can get really heated, because if there's anger, if there's fear, anxiety, insecurity, judgment, all of that's going to come up with it, and it'll get focused on whoever's on the other side of it. So to be able to play fair is to
wait, hold on. I want to zoom into that.
Yeah.
Whatever they're feeling, it's going to get focused into the other person
who's in front of them right now. So it doesn't matter who, I wasn't a part of what happened in the original history, but if that gets triggered, whoever it was, that all the energy and wave of that emotion that's coming up right now is being focused on me as if I was that.
Mm.
And that's incredibly common. That's one of the, when we get, especially in our interpersonal relationships, when we get triggered, the person that's going to get the worst of it is going to be the people that are closest to us.
Mm.
So it's important to the better you know yourself and you know your partner, you know your partner's triggers, and you recognize when they are in a triggered state, to be able to hold space for them without taking it personally.
Hold space for them. So it sounds like, in a way, almost like allowing them to express the feelings.
Yeah.
Without
taking it personally.
Without taking it personally.
Yeah.
So knowing it's like, this is not mine, but allowing them to express, this is going to be the practice of empathy. It's like, how do you do that without being observed as almost robotic?
So that would be, that's actually one of the issues that I have. And it's not robotic. It's coming across as dismissive. Right? Because to not take it personally means not to respond emotionally. The other person's responding emotionally. Well, if I respond back emotionally and get defensive, get angry in return, then that we're going into a downward spiral. We're not coming out of that positive. So, to be able to so
it's perceived like you're dismissing it, right?
It can be perceived as being dismissive. Yes. Yeah.
And to that, we just surrender, because that's the best outcome.
Well, it's just, I don't know if it's the best outcome. If it depends on who we're in conflict with. And the level and degree that they're willing to explore what is true, to get out to the other side. If it's a superficial relationship, it's somebody that who I don't know that well, then it's there's not going to be a whole lot of time invested on seeing it all the way through, and they may not be a person who's practiced well enough to be able to do that. This is something that takes practice from the people who are participating in it.
Yeah, so it's a tool.
Yeah,
it's a dance between the two. Yeah,
it's a tool that I have a lot of experience at because I'm a coach, and as a part of being a coach is being able to sit with someone and not be emotionally attached to what they're going through.
So you're not talking about basketball coach.
No,
you're talking about with clients. Life coach.
I'm talking about being a coach. I mean, basketball coach is definitely part of it. Right. And
so what do you get that you're not taking up this? I'm really trying to dive into this. How has that helped you be strong in that? Like have strong boundaries, not take it personally, hold your side of the bargain, I guess.
I mean, there's a number of things that have helped me here. So coaching is one of them because coaching has given me practical experience. My own work in my personal work and my spiritual journey. I spent a number of years working with teachers. I talked about last time going to Joshua Tree. I think a 3 to 5 year period of time, I was at Joshua Tree every 3 months for, I think the best way to describe it is spiritual workshops. I don't like that as a name because it doesn't really describe what we were doing. But it was sitting in a group, 15 people, really uncomfortable IKEA couches in a big rectangle in a house in the middle of Joshua Tree, with our teacher Charles leading. And it was 3 days. We'd show up on a Friday late, all day Saturday, like starting early. We'd break for breakfast and then dinner. And the rest of the time we're sitting in these IKEA couches, and it's a little bit of meditation. And then each person's doing a share, and they're sharing with Charles, our teacher.
Sharing what? Whatever comes up?
Whatever comes up. What's come up for them in the meditation, what's coming up for them in their practice, what they're struggling with, where their challenges are. It's 15 people.
Yeah.
So it could be 2-3 hours before it's your turn. So you're sitting listening, not participating, but just observing. So that was a starting point because people are sharing like deep stuff, the things that are going on, sometimes traumatic, the areas in which they're struggling. Oftentimes they're sharing things that I would find provocative, kick up my judgment in the way where it's like, I want to be able to just go shake them and just be, you're just not seeing it. Like, it's so simple. Like I'm the one that has the answers for you. Which would then expose how my ego thinks that it knows and it has the answers and the solutions. But that it was just a practical practice of listening, seeing other people where they're at and hearing them without interjecting, without participating in a dialogue. And then also witnessing my teacher, Charles, hold that space for them. Walk them through the process. Kind of help them see the things in which they're blind to, and give them things to look at, to work on, to help improve whatever their process.
But so this almost sounds like in the mainstream world, you would go to counseling, and you would then have the opportunity to speak your version of the truth, and then you're getting to discover what the truth was, and then maybe you're talking about what other person's truth was. But I'm saying, was there ever an scenario where in what you're describing in Joshua Trees, where, largely you would hope that everybody's coming in with good faith of this is not like we're all friends and we're hanging out. We're actually, right, we're here to learn something, or we're part of this.
Right.
But someone losing that just because of whatever they're really processing at that time, or something triggered, that they would forget that kind of space that they're in, and they would act as if this is like a friend. I don't know, because I feel like the reason why I'm asking is because oftentimes, and that goes back to the question of what do your fights look like, and sometimes in the fights, especially the people that are closest to you could lose, or you don't always want to be in that where it's like, hey, it's this feeling of I'm in a counseling session.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it would definitely be a version of group therapy. minus the, the degree holder of the person leading the group. Right. That part would be questionable because, Charles never sold himself as a psychotherapist or shrink or anything like that. And it wasn't sold as this is,
we're here to do
therapy.
this. Yeah.
I'd say out of that group, there were very likable people, and there were definitely people who were like, I definitely had really tight friends that were doing the work with me. We, my Southern California friends, best friends since I was childhood, friends here in Austin would be there as well. But it was very clear, like when you get there, you're not talking outside of your shit. Like we were eating breakfast and dinner quietly. We were supposed to be in observance the whole time. Do you have a specific question on that part, that last part?
No. But I will take us this way. When you were saying like, oh, we're like taking turns in listening to whatever it came up for people, and you're not participating in that, it rang a bell for me from what we talked about last time of being able to observe ourselves, and it's like, oh, that sounds like a great opportunity for us for those participants to just observe whatever kicked up for them.
So let me describe some of the things, like what I learned in myself.
Yeah.
Sitting and listening to people sharing their lives, the deep stuff going on would provoke really uncomfortable things that I wouldn't necessarily want to share. I'd feel anger and rage and a tremendous amount of judgment at that person. I'd be annoyed, like, just that, really, that's all, like, this is it? This is what you got? As if whatever I have is so much bigger and more important. Which is a really great thing for me to observe. And I would often share that in my share. I would talk about the things that I'm observing in myself in the group, because that was a part of my truth, which was always interesting because other people appreciated that because they were doing the same thing was going. Everybody has that. Everybody's having that same experience. That was a really good learning for me to understand, like, to be in that, to see that in myself and hear that from other people, because to go through that, to go through that over several years of practice, you start to see, like, oh, when we are speaking from an emotional place, everything we're perceiving in the world is filtered through those emotions, which then means the way that we are responding is also filtered through those emotions. And so we're more likely to say something, say the wrong thing, say it in a way that provokes other people. It's not an accurate portrayal of the truth or even our version of the truth. And so we're more likely to say things that are hurtful, not true, not real. And to witness that, it just maybe like developed a thicker skin, right? My nerve endings at my skin level were not so sensitive that you say one little slight and I fly off the handle. It's like, no, you can say some mean stuff to me and I'm not going to take it all that personally. Like, because I know that most of the mean things that people say isn't really all that serious. I know it doesn't go that deep. And to some degree, again, coming back to, like, professionally being a coach, I'm a coach that works in the world in the area specifically around pain. And pain is deep and vulnerable. So the things that people share about their pain, the conversations that we get into, are going to be incredibly deep and vulnerable. And it's going to come from a very hurt place, a very emotional place, and it's going to be filtered through those triggers of that pain and that hurt. And so as a coach, I got to witness that as well. And to be able to witness it in a way in which empathy is definitely a big part of it. But I think this is, empathy can be dispassionate. just because I can empathize with you doesn't mean I'm going to rise to the same emotional level as you. Right? I can be empathetic and give the space for the share.
Yeah.
Because often, like, in order to really see what's going on, you need to be able to fly off the handle a little bit. If you're in a process, you need to be able to say the worst things. You need to be able to do the worst things. And it's nice to have a safe room in which you can do that. You know, it's almost like you got a safe room with padded walls. Or it could be like an escape room where you you're allowed to slam things and break things.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, it's like everything in here was breakable. Nothing in here. We made sure like this is a safe room that you can express what you need to express. And when we walk out, we're not taking it personally.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I find I've gotten better and better at. And so I'm able to do, that's when I'm in conflict with my partner, I'm still a coach. My coach doesn't go away. Like that part of me is still part of me too. And so, I can sit there and I can see, there's a trigger here and I'm interested in getting to the bottom of the trigger. What is that? And knowing that to get to that means that there's going to be some uncomfortable feelings that come up along the way. And there's going to be some things that are going to be said from those feelings. They're not meant for me. I'm not going to take them personally. I'm not going to attach myself to them because I know that that's not that, even if I might have some fault, some responsibility in the hurt, usually what's being said is meant to hurt back.
Yeah.
So I don't need to get wounded in the process, because if I am,
you can let yourself wounded, right? Or the opposite would be that you could protect yourself from that, so to speak, like hurt that someone's trying to do.
I mean, that's what defensiveness is. Yeah.
But so in what you're saying here, like what happens if somebody wants you to, you said something about, in talking about empathy, you don't have to operate from the emotional level that someone else is experiencing in that moment. But what if somebody wants you to do that? Because to them, it's like, that's like, now you can actually empathize with what I'm saying, only by if I'm engaged in that manner.
So it's a good question. So,
otherwise you're not actually empathizing, according to them. Right.
The way I would describe this is, you got to meet people where they're at. And often, like when somebody's in a triggered state, they don't know that they're in a triggered state. They don't, triggers are tricky. A lot of people are in a triggered state all the time. It's one, let me get into, I feel like I want to define trigger a little bit better, because trigger really has to do with, nervous system, sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic being fight or flight, it's parasympathetic being, rest and restore. I think I'm getting that right. My dyslexia sometimes gets those flip-flops, so hopefully I got those right.
Yeah.
State of fight or flight. When we go into a state of fight or flight, we lose frontal cortex. Blood flow to our brain starts to retreat, goes more towards our reptilian brain, because we don't need blood flow going to our frontal cortex, because our frontal cortex is more, is focusing on long-term planning. And you think of fight or flight being a bear jumps out in front of the woods. I don't need to think about my taxes that are due in 3 months, right? I don't need to think about things that are going to be off in the future. I need right now. So we lose blood flow to the front of the frontal cortex. Our blood stops going to our digestive system because we don't need to digest our food right now. Instead, blood goes to the heart pumps faster, respiration increases, blood goes to our extremities so that we're ready to either fight or flee. And then rest and restore is obviously the opposite. Nice deep breaths. We start sinking, our heart rate lowers, we start regaining frontal cortex. I believe that most people are operating in a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
All the time. First, we live in artificial light. First thing we do in the morning is we pick up our phone. We get news, and it's usually bad news. We're constantly provoked in this state of, little bit of a heightened state of fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
That is a triggered state. When we get triggered, what's getting triggered is, our fight or flight system generally. Because it's on a fight or flight that, anger, aggression, defensiveness, the things that we need to either fight or defend ourselves are going to get kicked up. And they're going to get kicked up whether it's a physical or an emotional or a verbal altercation. Like whatever it is, that is going to be a heightened state.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what a trigger is. And some people are in a triggered state all the time. Often because they got the same triggers happening all around them, and it's just they're unaware of it. And so they don't even recognize how little of their long-term thinking and planning they're able to take advantage of, and that everything they're doing is very immediate gratification oriented. I'm uncomfortable. I need to get comfortable, or I'm already getting all the things I want, and I'm going to continue to get all the things I want, even if getting the things I want might not be good for me long term.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the question of someone wanting to meet them at their level,
right? So. Occasionally there will be clients who have a big fight going on. It's not a big fight with me. It's just they're in a
huge trigger space.
They're in a big trigger space, and they may not even be aware of it, but they're ready to have a fight. And in those cases, I will generally meet them where they are at. So if they're talking, generally somebody's in a triggered state, they're not listening, they're interjecting, they're talking over, they can't, they're not actually listening to me complete sentences, especially because I tend to take several sentences to get to the end of a complete thought. So they're interjecting, and they're trying to one up the conversation. In which case I will match tone, match voice, and occasionally get loud, make loud noises in order to get a jolt to where I can get them to stop and quiet down. And that will, sometimes they feel like, I'm angry at them. They'll, which is understandable because they're angry and I'm matching that energy. But usually when we get to that point, it's I'm not emotionally invested here.
That's a big one, right? Because that's sometimes for me, I think it's I can lose track of when I'm coming from a neutral point of view to then I'm also in it. That fine line of, and I would imagine that comes with just years of practicing and observing your thoughts and your emotions.
And it helps doing it with clients because I'm truly not as emotionally invested in my clients as I am with the people in my life.
You're going back to the coach.
Right. So,
right.
That has been a really helpful experience in my interpersonal life, because my interpersonal life, that's useful, but I can't bring that same approach.
So you're talking about
because in my interpersonal, I am emotionally invested.
Right. And you could take it personally or vice versa.
Well, and it's not even that. I'm emotionally invested in ways in which my emotions are filtering the way I'm perceiving and seeing what's happening, as well as what I want to come out of it as an outcome. And so there's levels in which I have to be aware of my own truth that are in those situations that are going to be different than what I'm with my clients. So working with clients has been really helpful in just seeing that dynamic, especially the triggered state, matching it, and all these things.
Yeah.
But when it comes to conflict in my interpersonal, it's a different level. It's, those are helpful things. The time and Joshua tree were really helpful, which I utilize as tools, but then there's another level altogether. And that level is, it's not just about the other person, it's also about me. I have to share my side,
Mm.
right? What am I feeling too? Where am I at? What of this am I experiencing? Going back to Joshua Tree, learning how to, not just Joshua Tree, but also we did workshops here in Austin as well. With my other teacher, Marilyn, for 8 years, weekly sharing at depth the things that were uncomfortable, especially the things that I'm feeling that I don't necessarily want to show other people. So that would be the interpersonal when it comes to the conflict part. Yeah. I'd say how do I fight? I think the first thing I would say is an answer, better answer to that is I tend to fight by falling on the sword. Which
It
means
sounds
that
like accountability.
I'm willing to put my side on the table first if I have to. Even if the things that I have to share that are going on for me feel incredibly vulnerable. Even if what I'm sharing might mean that, I have to take some blame.
Mm.
Right. It's like, yeah, I can see how what I did offended you. Even if the intent that I put into it was not to be offensive. I was not trying to hurt you or harm you. But I can understand how what I did might have triggered that for you.
Okay.
Right? Like, and which is great. So like, let's get to the bottom of the trigger so we can separate. So I don't have
can
to
see
be
how
a
that's
part
like
of that.
inviting also.
Right.
Could be. Right.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is sometimes I am wrong.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I say the wrong thing. Sometimes I put my foot in my mouth. Sometimes I behave like an idiot and regret it later. Like, and so sometimes it's like, my bad.
Yeah.
Like I can't take it back. It was, I'm sorry. I apologize. And that was a mistake. And I understand if you're mad at me, and I accept that, which is a very difficult thing for us to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
That took me a long time to get comfortable with that. And I can't say that I'm comfortable with it. It's never comfortable. It's always uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is that
because there's
like certain part of the interpersonal, because even though I'm practiced at it, it's still uncomfortable, which means the uncomfortable nature is like, if I don't intentionally go there, I'll avoid it.
Yeah.
I'll let it slide without bringing it up, and I'll let the other person take all the blame. These are areas in which there's a tremendous amount of work and effort that takes place.
You were talking about trigger oftentimes being something that has a connection with the past. Does trigger always have a connection with the past?
I think my assumption is yes. Yeah.
So you were saying, like, you were in the group setting and something, and then it triggered you. You're saying that's something that was within you that got triggered from your association with certain stories from the past, but you didn't really get triggered from that person or something like that.
Right. I mean, it's probably a little more murky than that, because, what is it that might be triggering that there are people who, tell stories that are, I'll just point out the particular, there's a type of person and this type of person is actually me. So let me start with that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of victimhood. Probably victimhood that comes from a good origin. Like there's a great origin story to most people's victimhood. Some trauma in childhood. And so, a really good victim story, and somebody who really sits in that triggered state of victimhood for a long time, which I did. There's a way in which they talk about themselves. There's a way in which they talk about the past. There's a tone of voice and an inflection in the way that they do it. It's a little whiny. It's a little complainy. It's always seeing the things for the dark side of things, and not really the light side. That triggers the crap out of me. Those kinds of people trigger me a lot. And it's not what they say. It's not the actual words. It's the tone of the voice, the mannerisms. It can be their posture, their body language. It's rooted in the past because most of it is a reflection of me and the parts of me that I find really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're specific instances that got triggered. If
or
not,
ideology of it, or anything. It's like there's an aspect of it that you're like, man, like I experienced this and it's just irking me still. That's what you're saying. So in that case, that trigger for you does have a connection to the past.
Yeah. And I think that's a lot of people's triggers is masculinity is a big trigger for a lot of people, especially modern day. More so currently than I'd say 20 years ago. A lot of people in my circle, any kind of overt masculine aggression, even if it's not violent, even if it's not abuse, can be triggered, can trigger people to a state in which they see it as abuse. They see it as bad. I actually have an example of this. We had a basketball game yesterday, and in the game, there was a little bit of a scuffle that took place.
Players?
Yeah. It was just one of those, like, two boys got the ball, whistle blows, neither one of them wanted to let go. Both of them still tugging at it, and then it turns into a little bit extra.
Yeah.
And then other guys kind of come in, and it could have very quickly blown up and been violent. In fact, one kid came in and like pushed another kid. He pushed his own teammate, but he pushed his own teammate into someone else again, which kind of just added to the whole thing. After the game, I was talking to parents, and of course, depending on which side, the parents for our side, it was the other team that really was the more involved in that altercation. But nothing bad happened. Yeah. It was normal. And these are boys, teenage boys with a tremendous amount of testosterone playing a physical sport like basketball. So it wasn't anything.
Trying to win.
And there was a little trash talking from the other team. There was a little immaturity from a couple of the players. Most of the guys on the other team were good guys. Coach was good. Like they were like none of this is a complaint that any I don't think anybody did wrong. It was it was actually a game that I really enjoyed because of this. But the conversation that came up afterwards was talking about the other team and the way that they behaved as if they had, as if we should have called the police to have them come over and investigate. It was so extreme to a level of violence. And there was just a natural discomfort with the fact that, like, no, this is what boys do. Like physical aggression. The reason we have basketball is because boys are going to be physically aggressive. And so it's a way of teaching constructive aggression versus destructive aggression. We can do things for a common good, working towards something positive, or we can let this go and it's going to be destructive to society. Because aggression is going to be there one. You're not going to get rid of aggression just because you don't like it. Yeah. And so there's a lot of people who are triggered by male aggression just as a thing, regardless of whether it's positive or negative. Just the fact that it exists, it triggers them.
So it's like they fail to see that it's that same thing that's causing a particular like team to win or something, right? Because it's like you need a little bit of that to like, and then have it be used skillfully to score a basket or whatever. But here, the outcome just wasn't optimal, so that it's like male aggression is bad.
That's right.
Right. There was a thought for me that occurred where it's like, whoa, maybe it was like an aha moment. Where it's like trigger is attached to the past, like almost always, and I'm still kind of unpacking that a little bit. I don't know what the truth is. I don't know how true it is because I don't know the scenarios in which you could get triggered that has nothing to do with your past. Or is it always that it has something to do with that?
I mean,
especially when you're talking about like, oh, you wake up and you hear bad news and things like that may not have so much to do with your past. It's just this heightened state that you're in, going back to the fight or flight system being triggered.
So my assumption is that it's is associated with the past. It can be associated with the past because how I responded in the past is probably how I'm responding right now.
Whoa, I just thought about something. So, hold on. Let me listen to what you're saying.
Okay.
So that I can... How you're responding right now is how I probably responded in the past.
Right.
That's what you said, right?
Right.
And then the thought I had was like, we may even have that in our genetics from a point of view of like just how does fight or flight system get activated? I mean, like the way humans evolved and that staying with us throughout, like within our gene, like that could still be in the past.
Right. And that's actually a really good point. Yeah. I would definitely call that a past. I mean, that is our past.
Yeah. So it's not this lifeline.
So yeah, let's dive into that like fully. I've talked to you about this in session before. How our eyes co-evolved with snakes and other creatures that would sneak into our nests and steal our young. Going back to when our ancestors still lived in trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have there's aspects of our neurology through our vision in which in the periphery of our eyes, if we see the shape of a snake or the shape of a scorpion or the shape of a small cat, our nervous system will recognize that before we actually see it. That's a trick.
Before we're aware of it, right?
Before we're aware of it.
Yeah.
And our startle reflex is
that's the need
is connected to that.
Right.
If you see a snake and that snake jumps at you, you will startle and jump, not consciously. It'll be a response, a triggered response. That is something that is evolutionarily really old in our nervous system. So that's not even in our lifetime, but we are responding in a triggered state to things from our past history.
Yeah.
In the ways in which our ancestors had to endure, there's a reason we respond in particular ways to anger. If somebody has an angry voice, it's going to trigger us. That's a part of our past. Even if it's not a part of our, the individual's past, it's a part of our past. So there's going to be ways in which we respond to it from that history. And then there's also our life and the things that we've been exposed to. If you live in a house with somebody who's volatile, who had anger management issues, then it's not one trigger. It's triggers over a period of time.
Right.
So it's not like it was just a one event.
Right.
But it was definitely
like childhood or something. Yeah.
Right. And so any trigger that comes out, that's part of the reason we don't even recognize it as a trigger, is because that was just what life looked like. That was our experience. We weren't in a triggered state. That was just life.
Yeah.
And so when it comes up in the future, it's just, I feel like felt like a child again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think largely my assumption is that triggers are associated with the past, but it is far too complex to go, well, it was obviously your mother or your father,
or even like your childhood,
right?
Because that could be a big thing, but it's like we may not even know that.
Right. It's just like it's things going on in the past. If there's something specific that needs to be addressed, needs to be looked at, needs to be processed through in order to heal, it generally will come up on its own.
I think at some point today, you said that it was helpful because you've also sat in your triggered state. I want to talk more about that, about how does one do that? Is that more passive thing? Is that active? Like, is that what we call processing? If you can recall, you were talking about specifically, you're like, my intention is to sit with certain triggers from the past.
It's very active Because the first thing, it's active in the same way that, when I teach a movement assessment, right? The purpose of teaching a movement assessment is, what is my general state day to day, so that when I do this the same way every day, it's a very active thing. There's nothing passive about the assessment. You're very actively involved in the assessment.
The angles.
Right. Well, I mean, however it ultimately looks, it's not doing it one time that's going to give you any value. It's doing it every day. And by doing it every day, you have a better database of, well, this is how I feel when I move every day. So that all of a sudden when I move and it feels different, I have awareness, right? I am now aware of a state that is different. We could call it.
It's away from the baseline.
Away from baseline.
Yeah.
And now I have the opportunity to do something about it, which again is very active. So in the internal work, instead of doing movement on the floor, it's meditation, journaling, drinking water, taking walks, sitting.
Still being active.
It's still very active. I mean, a meditation is not a passive thing.
Yeah. Otherwise, you'd fall asleep.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which is fine too.
Right.
I've done that a few times.
So this is why I'm asking you this, because I almost considered meditation a passive thing, because to me, active thing sounds something like I'm going to sit and journal to figure my shit out. That would be the active version. Like, that's how I see it. Or even if I'm going to sit on a meditation to process my feelings. And I don't think you're talking about it like that, because I don't think one sits to meditate to process their things like that.
No,
I think meditation is processing.
Meditation's
like, if you're observing, I mean, that is processing.
Well, it's a part of the processing. Yeah,
right.
It's not all of it, but it's a part of it.
Yeah.
So,
you were gonna say something. The way this sounds, like my version of active.
It's one of the things I like about movement. Because we can, movement as a language, I find to be very useful in this. Is there such thing as a still state, a passive state? Is that even something that exists for us?
No.
Right. You can get as still as you can, and your body is still moving. Your heart is pumping, your blood is moving.
Yeah.
You're taking breaths, you got expansion and contraction. It's constant. There is no stopping. So even when we're trying to be still, it's very, very active. So the idea that anything that we do is passive, is just not accurate. Meditation is a very active process because it is being an observance. And this is actually one of the things that I learned, I saw in meditation in Joshua Tree and in my work, is the times in which I'd find myself distracted, where I would be in what I would describe as a passive state. And the next thing I know, I'm daydreaming, or I'm falling asleep, and I'm not paying attention to the person who's sharing. And I had a few retreats where I think I probably felt like I got great sleep because I slept through the whole thing. Because I was so resistant to participating internally in the process that's how I showed up. Those were actually really good retreats for me. Largely because I kept coming back. So I got to move through that, and I didn't stay in that place.
And that's an active process.
It's an active process. Right. It's a very active process.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you're working hard, but it is active. I think the hard work comes in when things get when the emotions get big and they get heavy, and the desire, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right? When the things that I'm feeling are uncomfortable, and I'm not used to that. And I'd rather go distract myself with something else to not feel those things. That's where it becomes really more effortful work, because you really have to sit in it at that time. So the active part again is being in observation. So breath, meditation, journaling, they're just tools. It's not processing, but it's tools, because it quiets us and allows us to turn that gaze more internally, which is still active, but we're now observing. What is it? What is our natural state on a day-to-day basis? If I do this every day for a period of time, I get a pretty good feel for what emotional state I'm in, especially with my journaling or with my meditation and journaling. It's taking breaths and then asking, what is there? What's in my heart? What am I feeling? And putting a word to it. What is the emotion to it? Anger, resentment, jealousy, fear.
You're doing this almost always?
Yes.
So, and are you doing this repeatedly?
Early in my work, yes.
Early, like, as in not early in the meditation?
For the first 10 years of doing this work, yes. So
that sounds to me like active thing.
It's very active.
It's like you're here, you're asking.
Yeah.
And you can't, you're not like, almost in a way, if your thought is like, oh, I wonder what that roller coaster ride would be like, you would like, okay, that's a thought, I got it. Come back to this thought now.
I don't know, it wasn't so much come back to this thought now, but it was like, if
what? Oh, so what's
so it's like there's a roller, like there's I'm on a roller coaster. Okay, so what is it that's fueling the roller coaster? The roller coaster is usually something going on in the head. There's a spin, right? There's a story.
Oh, I just meant like I'm literally on a roller coaster.
Okay.
Like I have a thought that's like just drifted off.
Right. But
I'm in Hawaii.
I'm using that as a metaphor. Then.
Yeah.
So because our thoughts are fueled by something. Mm-hmm. They're fueled by our emotions.
Yeah.
And
there's something underneath that.
The thought that's like, oh, I want to be on a roller coaster that's far away from here because that sounds fun and it means I don't have to sit here. That is usually coming from a specific emotion that has some resistance to experiencing what's going on right now. Or I may have a thought pattern of that person did this to me and they're such a bad person. And it's like, oh, if I catch that story and I come to here, then I go, oh, there's an emotion that's feeding that story too. It's anger, resentment, judgment. And if I put words to those things and start breathing in and getting to a place where I feel like was surrendering to those emotions, allowing them to come up and allowing them to move through, then as I come back to a more neutral emotional state, the state of spin dies out. Which is, again, that's part of the purpose of doing meditative practice, is to be in observance of this is my normal state. And and then I get to start to feel like this is anger, this is judgment, this is fear. I put words to it now, and I have associations to what they feel like. And because I do that for days on end, months to years, and it took me like 8 to 10 years of doing this kind of work before I really kind of started, before I was able to really integrate it into my life, where I could be in a conversation with somebody and all of a sudden I have this feeling that comes up. It's like, oh, there's some judgment. Okay. And I can breathe and surrender it while they're talking, while they're sharing. I can just be quiet. And I might go, it can be strong. And if it comes up strong enough, I'm like, this is going to influence what I'm going to say. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. Unless I'm being asked specifically for something, I can let the focus be on the other person.
Yeah. Or walk away.
Or walk away if I need to. Or say, I'm sorry, I'm processing. I need a moment. I need to take some breaths and I can come back to this, depending on who it is.
Yeah.
Most of the time, most of the triggers are the other person doesn't need to know. It's just superficial relationships. They don't need to even know. And most people, if you turn the focus on them and let them talk, they love it. They appreciate you for it. They don't even know that you got all this story going on, that you're calling them bad names in your head, right? again, it's creating that safe room in which you get to vent and process without it coming out of you and becoming a mess.
Yeah. Something that stood out to me here, where you kept saying this is not processing. You were saying meditation, journaling, drinking water, those are just tools. That's not processing. So what you're observing, but that's not all that's processing. I think you're alluding to that, right? That's a big one. I mean, what is processing? And we could definitely jump into that. Like,
I think I want to very simply define processing. I think it's a biological process. It's a biological thing. Because again, we're talking about the nervous system and the state of the nervous system. When we, one thing, we'll just start with this. We're always processing. Processing is going on all the time. We are a biological being that constantly has biological processes taking place.
I guess it probably has like connection with all levels of it too, because physically we're like digesting things like that. Mm-hmm. But then emotionally we're processing, like, so
emotionally
all levels, and
I've talked about this, like, so when we get triggered, somebody says something and it provokes anger, our body produces hormones, chemicals, molecules, flood in the bloodstream, spread through the entire system. That is anger being, put into the bloodstream. Same thing with fear, anxiety. All the emotions have a little bit of a different makeup. It's a biological process. We get triggered, nervous system has a response, floods our system in our blood. And now we're literally feeling it at a vibrational level because every cell in our body is now being influenced by it. So that is a biological process.
Right.
And if we're paying attention, it's like, oh, all of a sudden I'm feeling that this, I just got injected with this drug of anger. It's my heart's beating faster. My chest feels a little tighter. I'm no longer thinking about,
So basically in that you're processing,
right?
Like, I mean, you're always processing, but always it's processing. Like now maybe what happened is you just got aware, or like the goal is that you got the awareness that you went off of the baseline and there is these other molecules that my body is feeling.
Right.
That spike or whatever.
Right. What I'm looking at is being an observance of the entire the entire system, the state,
right.
So that I recognize when I am in disequilibrium so that I can work on getting back to equilibrium. But it's a constant process. I'm constantly processing. I'm constantly moving in and out of equilibrium for different reasons in different states. And everybody's processing, even if they're not using the same tools of processing that I am, right? People could be processing and they can be processing really poorly. They can be processing and they're just constantly processing in a state of fight or flight. They're redlining their emotional engine all the time. And that's just what processing looks like for them. Right. So processing doesn't mean I'm doing something the right way. Doesn't mean I'm doing it the wrong way. It is just simply it's like, this is a system of the body and it's how it works.
I see. So you're saying like, hey, I got into a fight. I'm super angry. Like now I'm going to go distract myself with YouTube. Like that is still me processing.
Yes.
Right.
Biological process is still taking place. And maybe YouTube, I take some breaths. I may not be conscious that I'm breathing.
Right.
Anger
is diluted
through the body. Yeah. Next thing I know, that's processed out. And I'm now I haven't worked on the trigger. I haven't worked on my awareness of it. I haven't worked on how I'm changing my behaviors around it, but I'm still processing. It's still a process.
Right.
So that's why tools and work are I separate those from processing because my process is no better or worse than anyone else's process. We are all processing human beings. It's just the state of the world and none of us are perfect at it. We all suck at it most of the time. But we have tools.
Yeah.
And there's work that we can do. And if we do the work, we can get better at responding to how we respond to things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like
Yeah.
it's, the better I am in observing, part of what I get to observe is when I respond poorly to how I respond and the outcomes that come from that. And I get to see if I change if I interject differently there,
In that
I have
timeline.
different outcomes.
Right.
And now I can look at, well, what's the difference in good outcomes and bad outcomes?
Yeah.
How can I do my work more diligently to have better outcomes?
Yeah. And that's the gift that we have as humans, because of how we evolved and having the ability to like view ourselves from an observer point of view.
Yeah.
Right. And like many beings may not have that perhaps, or how they see things and evaluate things that we're not aware of.
Yeah. I don't see very many examples of, there's the level of there's something specific about human consciousness that I don't think any other species has the ability to change the way they respond to how they respond. I think most all other species are specifically stuck at responding, being in a state of responding, of
just responding,
trigger and response, and that they're.
And then there's devastating outcomes or optimal outcomes too. Like there's a prey and you responded, but hey, weren't quick enough.
Right. And there is some level of learning, but it's not learning as much from the observer standpoint.
Yeah. Because that learning for them could be that it just becomes part of their response. Like they're just learning for that. Like I can have a quicker response or something. Ish. Yeah.
Or, I can learn how to use a tool in a different way that gets me more food and gives me more access to, to sexual partners and things like that. Like, I think those are most of the optimal outcomes for the rest of species. I think it's still largely the most optimal outcome for humans,
right,
on some basic evolutionary level.
Yeah. That's why we're still primals.
I think so. Maybe this is the difference. I don't know if any other human or any other species has the ability to experience a good life that does not specifically relate to passing down their genetic lineage ongoing. Like a human can not have children and live what is considered an exemplary life, a life well lived.
I feel like you're talking about almost like a choice.
I mean, maybe we're getting close to idea of free will.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Which I don't know. I feel rather outside of my scope of practice to get specific into that conversation. Yeah. But yes, I do think that it gets on the floats on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely a very unique experience to be a human being.
I wanted to say something that I wanted to say earlier, and I think I would really like to say in this context is when we were talking about the concept of sitting in a meditation or journaling and then observing and putting words to what comes up, to get a baseline of what all feelings that we are feeling on a, whole color wheel of the feelings. For me, it's actually been really interesting to not get caught up in the words specifically, but to just experience that. And so I may not have the words to describe that feeling. It may be adjacent to something, but there may be certain nuances and I may not have the correct words for it. But to get familiar with that, like just physical response within my body, because I will have it in specific areas of my bodies, it will be a specific pattern. So let's call it that. I just wanted to say that it's not like in an SAT and we're trying to be like, okay, that pattern equals anger, or that, like, who cares what that word comes out to be? But what's important is actually your relationship with what that is and how you associate that. Yeah.
Getting in touch with the feelings that we have in conversations with other people. The better that let me just say it as me, the better I've gotten at it. We're, catching the anger. Like, ooh, anger got triggered. And hearing the voice that anger uses, or that, victimhood's probably the better one because I used that example for myself earlier. Like the tone of voice that I would have when I would be in a very victimhood state, hearing that, feeling that is something that most humans share, right? Like most humans have a different inflection point. They speak differently. Our postures change based on our emotions. And so the more in touch I've gotten with that within myself, makes me a better mirror for other people. So when I'm talking to someone else, I don't always hear exactly what they're saying. The words that they might be using can sometimes just be moving past that there's a different conversation that's going on that I'm very much connected to. I feel like that might have been in what you were saying because I kind of had that experience with you when we were talking.
I think you're taking it like further, because it's like we may be using words to communicate here, back and forth, but whatever we're feeling energetically, I was like, hey, and I was saying like, it's important to observe that and get your baseline for it. But who's to say that that's just within this container? Like, who's to say it's not also spreading outwardly? And I think it is, because my posture would change, and that communicates something differently to you. And so there is that level of communication that's happening as well. And you were speaking about mirroring that, or just leading to a different outcome with that kind of awareness.
The way I think I would describe this is our neurologies are connected.
Yeah. Common neurology. Yeah.
And this one's, this is a tricky thing because if we're connected, where's that connection? Where's the physical connection of our neurology? This might be an area where I feel like I should probably do a little bit more research, because I bet there's some people who talk about this a little bit more. What is like, example, pair bonds. Humans tend to pair bond. There's a percentage of humans that are naturally geared towards monogamy and pair bonding. There's a good portion of humans that are on the other end of the spectrum. But within pair bonding, and that's not a right or wrong, right? That's just how humans come. But within pair bonding, what is a pair bond if it's not some level in which neurologies are combined?
Yeah, like shared, right?
Or that are shared.
Yeah.
To be able to feel what my partner is experiencing without them telling me, without them saying anything.
Being there for them.
Right. Other examples are, there are people who walk into a room and like they are the energy and everybody's heads turn. It's not like there's, it
wasn't pre-orchestrated. Yeah.
It wasn't pre-orchestrated. So what is it about, those people that like automatically are connected to everyone around them, in which they have a natural glow and everybody just naturally turns to them. There's people who are naturally likable and there's people who are just naturally not likable. I think those are aspects of our neurology that are reaching out and entangled with others, in ways that we just haven't figured out how that happens.
Yeah. Or measure or see.
My assumption is that it probably is measurable.
Yeah.
We just haven't figured out the tools to be able to measure it yet.
Right. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Hey, you made it all the way to the end. Thank you for watching it all the way through. Really appreciate you coming in and tuning into our conversations. If you enjoyed it, please, it would mean a lot for us if you can show us the support by subscribing to our channel or recommending it to a friend. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.